Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's titled How to Plan Strategically and Avoid Costly Pitfalls When Complying with Local Law 87. Today's presenter is Chief Operating Officer of Vert Energy Group, Anthony Olivas. But before we get started, I'll give you a quick background on the company to give you some context about who we are and how we help our clients. Vert Energy Group specializes in creating custom corporate efficiency programs for building owners and management companies. And in these programs, we focus on helping our clients improve profits and asset values across their portfolios, and we do this by making it easier to identify and go after the best efficiency opportunities they have that will reduce their costs, increase their profit margins, and help them improve their revenues. In those discussions, the local laws 87, 84, and 88 comes up often since they're all related to energy efficiency as well. And what we're finding out is that most of these companies do not have a long-term compliance plan in place, and that most of the energy audits that they're having to do aren't going anywhere afterwards. We're also seeing that a lot of these companies are missing some rebate opportunities, and sometimes they're even paying for audits when they could have gotten an exemption. So this is really what prompted us to come up with a better compliance solution. And it's why we created this educational program, to make it easier for building owners and managers to comply with all of these energy-related laws. Now let me pass the mic over to our presenter today, Anthony Olivas. Anthony, are you there?
Hey Sue, yes I'm here. Thanks for the introduction. I'm happy to speak on this topic today because it's one of the ones that most building owners rarely think about, but it really affects everyone who's involved with any local Law 87 compliance projects. Let's go ahead and get started and make sure that we stay on time. So the agenda for today is just for us to share our perspective on how building owners can get more value from their local Law 87 projects, how to lower the risks, and how they can save a lot of time and hassle through more careful and strategic planning. The first thing we'll talk about is the common problems and pitfalls to avoid. Then we'll cover the pros and cons of how building owners are complying with this law today, which will lead us to an example of the method that we use to create long-term compliance plans that help building owners make better and easier decisions. And I also want to make sure that we're on the same page here, because the purpose of today is really just to be informative and educational for you, not to try to sell you on our services or partnership program. Our goal is to help you walk away with some useful insights and new ideas you can do on your own. At the end, if you like our approach and if you think there might be some gaps in what you're already doing, then maybe we can explore some opportunities to help you in a one-on-one meeting. So if you're just looking to get a proposal for upcoming 2017 projects, you can find dozens of companies with just a quick Google search, really. But if you're looking to get more value with less risk from your local Law 87 projects, then you're in the right webinar. Now first, I'll share with you some of the common problems and pitfalls we've seen since this law started back in 2012. Let me start by talking about the energy audit tax. As you all know, in New York, building owners are being forced to spend thousands of dollars on energy audits just to comply with local Law 87 that really don't do anything else besides just collect dust while sitting on a shelf, right? Reason being, most owners just see this as another tax they have to pay the city, and not so much as an opportunity that the city really intended it to be. So they just end up with the company that charges the lowest cost because they don't plan to make any of the upgrades anyways. And they end up with the low quality audit and team that's not very helpful in getting any kind of return on investment other than just to meet the bare minimum requirements. But hey, I get it, right? It's not something most building owners were already planning to do, and everyone's tired of the city imposing so many new regulations that cost money. And what's worse is that it usually actually costs more money than you think, because we see a lot of building owners not budgeting for all the costs of compliance, and it's usually because they're just not fully aware of what they need to do. It is not just the energy audit that you have to pay for. The city also requires that you implement any of the required retro-commissioning corrections as well, which can cost anywhere from a few $100s to sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. So if this was not budgeted for ahead of time, it usually means that you're going to have to scramble towards the end of the year to find the money to pay for all of this, which is obviously something no one wants to do during the holidays, right? And besides this, a lot of building owners are taking on more risk than they need to by starting their projects too late, and then they face the risk of missing the deadline and being fined, or they might have to pay for an extension just so they can have a little bit more time to complete it. Or sometimes they won't have enough time to complete the testing and air balancing requirements, which has to be done separately in the winter and in the summertime. And also, just really, if you wait to the last 6 months to start, which a lot of building owners are doing, you're also rarely going to be able to take advantage of any kind of discounts that you could have received if you had started earlier in the year, since most engineering companies' plates are full at the end of the year. And also, just when you start at the last minute, it just creates a lot more unnecessary stress towards the holidays at the end of the year that no one really wants to deal with, right? The ideal time to start really varies depending on the building, what type of building it is, its size, the type of HVAC system it has, the age of that equipment. Also, how much time is it going to require from you during this process? Because what's your busy time of the year? At a minimum, the city recommends starting each project at least 18 months in advance to give yourself enough time to complete and budget for all of those requirements. This is especially true if you're building as a central chiller system because of the testing and air balancing requirements. So besides starting too late, one of the most common problems we see is a lot of missed opportunities. By not taking advantage of available discounts to reduce the cost of compliance, or maybe missing out on some rebates, and also missed opportunities to apply for exemptions from this altogether, such as if you had a building that was eligible for an Energy Star certification, but you did not apply for it, but you could have got that exemption. Or what's sometimes worse is that if you had actually applied for the Energy Star certification and received it to the last 3 years like you're supposed to, but you did not apply for that exemption just because you didn't know about it. So that means you ended up paying for an energy audit that you did not actually have to do. And a lot of times building owners just really aren't aware of what they're eligible for, what kind of exemptions they can receive, and they end up spending money on something they did not have to. And sometimes we'll see that building owners are paying too much and over market value for compliance services, usually without even realizing it. And they do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, they don't put together a formal RFP, so they might end up comparing apples to oranges without being aware of the hidden costs in some of those proposals. Maybe one of the companies is not paying for the filing fee and another one is, or they're charging extra for benchmarking, or they're excluding testing and air balancing fees when another one had it included. So that one may have looked like it was a higher cost when really it wasn't. Or maybe if the city asks to do a review of your reports, which is actually pretty common right now, they may end up charging you an additional fee for that. So they'll put all the risks on you instead of saying, hey, we're going to make sure we see this to fruition, and if the city asks for any kind of revisions, we're going to do it, and we're going to submit those revisions in time, because the city only gives you a small window to make any corrections, and if they are not following up as they're supposed to within that 10-day window, then the building owner could actually be fined. Another reason that building owners are paying too much for these compliance services is that a lot of companies are just going with the lowest bid they received from the start without even trying to negotiate better pricing and more value from the other vendors. And the reason we see this happening is that property managers are already too busy as it is, and they're being tasked with getting 5 proposals to send them to the building owner, and ultimately they're not going back to these other vendors to see if they can get any other better, more value or better rates before they bring them to the owner. So they just select the lowest cost and then you move on. And generally it's because they're just too busy and they have a lot of other priorities to worry about besides this. So that means that building owners are leaving more money on the table and extra value that they could have received. And this is especially true if the projects are being spread between several different vendors, because then you're not able to take advantage of better pricing that generally comes with economies of scale. Okay, now the last problem here is common to about 95% of the companies we talk to, having unclear or no long-term compliance plans for each property. Building owners will just take it 1 year at a time to get new proposals and to figure out all the details the same year buildings do. And from our perspective, we believe that this is the root cause of most of the problems that we've seen. A lot of companies are exposing themselves to much more risk than they should be. They're missing out on some opportunities and making simple mistakes. And they're also making the compliance process a lot harder on themselves than it really needs to be. Think to yourself for a minute now. What are some of the major risks and challenges you see regarding Local Law 87? What have been some of your frustrations about this law? So unfortunately, it's not too hard to understand why these problems are so common though. And a big part of the reason is because there's just so many different local laws that building owners and managers have to worry about, in addition to everything else they have on their plates. So it can be difficult to manage all these different regulations, and really Local Law 7 is just one of them. And I'm sure this is not the only thing you have to worry about, right? So that's why it's really important to find a simple solution to make the compliance process easier and less time consuming. We've even seen that some companies have had to hire a full-time 40-hour-a-week admin just to manage all these different projects and engineering firms. Next, I'll share with you our take on the pros and cons of the typical ways these laws are complied with today. There's 2 common approaches we usually see. The first is a do-it-yourself type approach, where a company will request new proposals every year a property is due and hires multiple vendors to help. Usually, you'll be contacted by new engineering firms who offer to give you a free proposal, and you'll usually already have firms that you've worked with in the past provide you with a quote too. The good thing about this approach is that it helps these companies stay current with the market to know if they're paying fair rates, as prices do tend to change every year. The bad thing is that it just requires a lot more time and attention to obtain and compare several different proposals every year, as well as to manage different companies throughout the project. It also opens you up to a lot more unforeseen risks because not all companies carry the right licenses and insurances, for instance, which can end up making a lower cost bid become much more expensive in the end, especially if the reports end up getting rejected and the building owner gets fined. And sometimes what's worse is that if a company did not carry the right workers' comp and liability insurances, for instance, and there was an accident during that energy audit on site, then that building owner could actually be sued by that employee. Obviously, that's something no one wants to have to deal with. But that being said, these risks can be mitigated, and this approach does work for a lot of companies who have the time and experience to properly vet each company they hire. And also for those that want to manage multiple vendor relationships, some people do, then this can definitely be a good option. But if you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to this process and you have other more important priorities to worry about, then this next one may be a better solution for you, which is to establish a strategic partnership with one company to take care of all your local Law 87 projects, as well as future laws you have to comply with, such as local Law 88. The good thing about this solution is that it can also help you receive competitive rates, since some companies will give you special discounts for consolidating services with them. It's also the easiest to manage, in my opinion, and will save you more time and effort by working with just one partner. But the potential downside is if you pick the wrong partner for your business. Obviously, trust and experience is really important here. And you also want to make sure that you choose a partner that will give you more value beyond just helping you meet the minimum compliance requirements. It's important to work with a partner that can add more value towards other business goals, priorities, and challenges you might have. That way you can leverage the relationship to get an actual return on investment instead of just paying the energy audit tax. Well, this type of relationship can be difficult to find though, especially since what's considered to be value is different for every company. So to help us figure this out, what we did was we surveyed our clients and other building owners to ask them what was important to them. And here's a list of the top things they said they wanted a partner to help them with. Things such as they wanted a partner to help them make better decisions and reduce their risks. They also said it was important that they work with someone who will make their jobs easier by saving them time and hassle. And some wanted a partner to work with who can help implement projects after the energy audit was complete. Think about it from your perspective too. What would you say is most important to you when selecting a partner to work with, and what kind of value do you look for? What we've learned is that it's different for every company. There isn't just a one-size-fits-all partnership that's a good fit for everyone. What's important for one isn't necessarily valuable to another. And with this understanding, we designed our partnership program to be customizable to let our clients maximize their value based on what's important to them. Some owners care about enhancing their sustainability image, so we can help them go for LEED or an ENERGY STAR certification. Some need help with ongoing engineering support and project management because they might not have the in-house expertise to do some of the things themselves. And then there's others that just don't care to make any improvements at all, so they just want the lowest cost to comply with local Law 87, and that's fine. Depending on the company you partner with, they may give you special discounts and value-added services such as free benchmarking, energy monitoring, and various other services. As far as our partnership program, there's a variety of different things that we do to deliver more value, but we're not going to spend time on this right now because it's not the objective for today. But what I will do is show you our methodology for creating more effective long-term compliance plans. And the purpose of this is really to help you avoid risks, make better decisions, and to save time and reduce the hassle of complying with the city's requirements. There's some important elements that we recommend including in your plan. At a minimum, it should clearly tell you how much you need to budget each year for compliance, taking into account all of the costs, such as the standard energy audit cost, the city's filing fee, and the estimated cost to implement those required retrocommissioning corrections. Other elements that your plan should include are things such as what type of energy audit should be conducted, if any of your properties are eligible for exemptions, and very importantly, when is the ideal time to start each project? And it's not just 6 months before it's due, right? Now, let me give you an example of our approach to planning these projects. There's a few different purposes of having this compliance plan. From an executive standpoint, you just want to know how much do you need to budget each year. And at a minimum, it should clearly give you this information in a nice timeline. That way you can budget more accurately at least the year before instead of waiting to find out how much it'll cost the same year a building is due, which is actually what most companies are doing right now. Plus, it's just also a lot easier than spending time requesting new proposals every year, right? All right, so now let's say, for example, that you're in the process of creating next year's 2017 budget. You would open up your compliance plan to see that you need to budget a little over $47,000 for Local Law 87 and 3,500 for Local Law 84. And once you start planning for Local Law 88, this should also be included in your budget. And by the way, this is something that you should be looking into if you haven't already. This is the new law that requires building owners to install lighting controls and submeters. If you wait too long, it'll cost more money later on since it's based on the current energy codes at the time that you finish those requirements. Okay, now going back to the example, if you're also involved with implementing these projects too beyond the budget, then you want to know how that budget is broken down and what it includes. So let's expand this here. Here we're including the cost of the energy audit and retro commissioning study, and we find that this is usually the only cost most building owners are budgeting for. But there's also the filing fee right here and the cost to implement those required corrections right here. And unfortunately, this can sometimes cost more than the energy audit itself, especially for larger buildings with older mechanical systems. The problem is that you just don't know exactly what needs to be done and how much it will cost until after the first walkthrough is conducted. So that's just another reason why it's really important to start this as soon as possible. And what we do in our compliance plans is we give our partners at least a ballpark estimate of how much this could cost based on our experience with similar buildings. So at least you can have an idea of how much you should budget for ahead of time. Now, in addition to this, your compliance plan should also include what type of energy audit is most appropriate, possible exemptions you're eligible for, and any special discounts that you can receive for early compliance or other reasons. The boxes you see here are just some of the examples for different energy audits and exemptions you would want to look at when making your compliance plan. For instance, if you own a large office building that's wasting a lot of energy, then we might recommend a level 3 energy audit instead of a level 2. Reason being, a level 3 will help you uncover deeper savings opportunities, and the report will be implementation ready, as opposed to a level 2, which will usually require more due diligence and extra costs prior to implementation. Another reason we might recommend a level 3 is because you could be eligible for a rebate from Con Edison, which will pay for half the cost, making it less expensive overall than a level 2, so you end up with a much higher quality audit for less costs. There's also other exemptions you can go after if your building was LEED certified or Energy Star certified, for instance. And one that could be a good option for smaller multifamily properties is the simple buildings exemption. There's a list of 7 simple retrofits the city gives us. And if the property meets 6 of them, then you could actually get an exemption from the energy audit altogether. And this includes basic retrofits such as low flow water fixtures, insulating your hot water pipes, if you have front loading washing machines on site, if your radiators have individual heating controls and other things like that. So depending on whether or not these retrofits have already been completed, it could be more cost effective to go for the exemption instead of the energy audit. But if none of them have been done yet, then the energy audit might actually be your best option because it'll be simpler and less expensive if you didn't have any of those retrofits done. And we have a self-assessment checklist we can provide you with to give you a better idea of what exemptions you might want to apply for or at least look into. The next thing we'll talk about is deciding when to start each project. But first, take a moment to answer these questions on your own. What factors do you think are important that should go into this decision about when to start each project? And what reasons can you think of for starting a project more than 18 months before the deadline, which is the minimum time frame the city recommends? Okay, now I'll give you our perspective on this as well. And it's not saying it's the only way to think about it, but it's how we like to see it. We believe that this is one of the most important things you can do in your compliance plan to determine the ideal start date for each property. Sometimes it makes sense to comply a year or 2 in advance, and other times you can start the same year it's due and be fine. It really varies from property to property. In our approach, there's 3 different factors we recommend taking into consideration. The first is definitely important to know when a building is due for Local Law 87. This is important, of course. So any of them that are due within 18 months should receive a priority, but it's not the only factor that should be taken into consideration, and the due date should not dictate when these energy audits are started. Because beyond that, we also want to look at is if there's any specific issues or opportunities at a property that may warrant starting an energy audit sooner. And this can include things such as if there's some tenant complaints about comfort issues. Maybe there's aging equipment that needs to be replaced soon, and an audit will help create the best solution for that replacement. Or maybe if a building's energy use had been unexpectedly increasing or decreasing, we'd want to know why that's happening, and the energy audit will be able to tell us that. Another good reason could be if you could save some money through any special early compliance discounts as an incentive to start before the 12-month mark. I know for us that we give up to a 15% discount for this because it's really in everyone's best interest to start this as soon as possible. Now, the third thing that's important to take into consideration here is how much money a building has the potential to save with the good return on investment. Because sometimes it does make sense to conduct an energy audit sooner if we know it's wasting a lot of money, since the audit is the first step to figuring out how to solve that issue. I'll show you what I mean using the example from earlier. Let's say, for instance, that we find out one of your buildings is wasting about $150,000 a year in utility costs, but it wasn't due for compliance until 2019. If we waited just 3 years to start that project, closer to its deadline, then that's about $450,000 that would be lost in the meantime. So in this case, it actually might make sense to start that project sooner so you can find a way to save that money as soon as possible. But then we have to ask ourselves, is losing $150,000 a year a big enough reason to start a project sooner? Well, the short answer is it depends. How does it stack up to your other properties? How much are they wasting compared to this one? So let's just say that once we do this math, we figure out that out of the 3 buildings that are due in 2017, they're collectively wasting, let's say, $65,000. That's divided by 3 properties. And then the 2 properties due in 2018, let's say they're around $80,000, so $40,000 a piece. Now, if we actually knew this information, then I think it would be safe to say that the one property that's losing $150,000 by itself should be made a priority since there's a lot of opportunity there, especially compared to the other buildings. So in this case, we might actually recommend starting this project sooner, closer to 2017, instead of waiting until 2019 to start. Now, I think that there's one more scenario that we should address here, so I'll play devil's advocate. If there was a situation where you had 2 properties wasting about the same amount of money, but there was only enough money in the budget to start one of them earlier, how would we decide which one to start? In my opinion, I think that we should choose the property that has the greatest ability to get us back a good return on investment. So if they both could save up to $150,000 and property A had a benchmark score of 95 and property B had a benchmark score of 65, then I think we should go with property B, right? Reason being, due to the law of diminishing returns, the more efficient a building is, the less low-hanging fruit they have. So the more expensive it's going to be to capture each extra dollar of savings. So property B would most likely be able to save that $150,000 with the highest return on investment. I know you're all muted on this live call, but if you have any questions about this, just enter them in the chat box and we'll be sure to answer them at the end here, all right? Now, the problem is most building owners just don't know how much their buildings are actually wasting, so it can be difficult for them to make these kind of well-informed decisions. So what we did to help our clients overcome this challenge is we developed a new tool called Portfolio Efficiency Assessment. And this is a financial report that looks at all the properties you own and manage at the portfolio scale, and then shows how much each of them have the opportunity to save, how much room for improvement they have, and how efficient they are compared to others. That way, you'll be able to look at all of your properties on a macro level and know where the best opportunities are and which ones are wasting the most money. Having this information is really key to planning Local Law 87 projects more strategically to help you make better decisions about when to start each of them and how you can get better returns on investment. Now, to wrap things up, let's go back to the elements to include in your compliance plan. To summarize what we talked about, these are the basic elements at a minimum that should be included in the plan. And then we want to take it a step further. We want to factor in the estimated savings potential for each property, as well as any other key issues or opportunities that could make a property a priority. By combining both these basic and advanced elements, this is going to help you significantly improve your compliance plan to help you get better returns on investment, as well as to minimize those risks and common problems that we talked about earlier. And yes, it does take a little bit more time and attention to put this plan together up front, which is why I think most companies just take it year by year instead. But I really do believe that it's much better to measure twice and cut once because it saves a lot more time in the end and makes the process a whole lot easier, right? And for the companies that really just don't have the time or experience to make this plan their own, then it is something that we can help them with. As a part of our partnership program, the first thing we do is help you put together a 10-year compliance plan, and we'll also conduct a portfolio efficiency assessment since it's a crucial part of the planning process, for us at least. The reason we do this without even charging for it is because we realize that this is the best way to begin any relationship by helping you make well-informed decisions to ultimately help us both figure out whether or not it's a good fit to work together and if we're able to give you any more value than what you're already doing. Well, that wraps up the prepared material we had planned to go through today. I know we only had enough time here really just to scratch the surface of these topics, but we'd be happy to spend more time on this with you in a follow-up meeting if you're interested. As I mentioned in the beginning, the purpose of today was just for us to share our perspective on how you can get more value from Local Law 87 and what risks to avoid. For us, we believe that it starts with putting together a well thought out plan and custom strategies in writing for each of your properties. Now, as far as how we might be able to help you specifically, what we can do is help you put together a draft of your compliance plan if you don't have one already, and then we can set up another time to talk and then review that plan together. And again, there isn't a cost for this either, so make sure to take advantage of that if you haven't already. The information on the screen is how you can sign up for this free service. Now, we have about 10 more minutes left, so let's get to some of the questions that came in during today's call. Sue, what do you have for me?
Hey, Anthony, we've had quite a few questions come in from the audience that we need to answer, and we've got time to answer a couple of them now. So for the rest, we'll make sure that we will email you all of your responses after this call. Okay, the first one comes from Alan. He asks, what are some of the retro commissioning requirements that have changed or become stricter since this law started?
You know, that's a really good question, Alan, because there's actually many things that have changed since 2012, which was when the first round of submissions was due. Among the most important, though, is the fact that the city is becoming much more strict in the review process. We believe this is to weed out some of the engineering companies who may not have the experience or expertise to do the retro commissioning studies the way the city wants them to be done, even though they might have all the right licenses and certifications to be qualified to do the work. I'll give you a quick timeline of what we've seen happen over the years from our experience. So about back in 2012, when this law was started, the energy efficiency reports were barely reviewed by the city, most likely because it was the first year, so they went a little bit easy. Then in 2013, more of those submissions were reviewed, and some engineers were given first-time youthful offender status, as we call it, because they didn't complete all the requirements correctly. Then in 2014, the Department of Buildings really started cracking down and reviewing the submissions more carefully, and they started to enforce the laws and enforcing penalties. Right now, we see a lot of the reports that were submitted in 2014 are still barely being reviewed. So that means any of the reports that you might have submitted then could actually still be pulled at any time. Then in 2015, the Department of Buildings was much more stringent, and they even started auditing some of the buildings themselves. Now this year in 2016, we've seen that they have auditors in the city that will actually go out and re-audit buildings from their viewpoint. And this is not a good time for someone who's been cutting corners, not properly testing the building. From what we've seen, the city will go out and find one of the larger, more complicated buildings an engineering firm has done and audit that one. If they did not test the building properly or they didn't use the right protocols or equipment, the building will actually go through one after the other iterative reviews. And then if it fails, the reports will be rejected and then you'll have to start over. And then the building owner will actually be fined retroactively $3,000 for the first year and $5,000 every year thereafter until it's done right. What's important is that the auditor is not responsible to fix these mistakes. It's the responsibility of the building owner. And some firms may not stick around to help fix those problems within the city's strict deadlines because they only give us about 10 days to make any of these corrections. That's why I meant it was really important earlier in making sure you choose the right partner because some of them may not be around to help you with these and they put all the burden on you. Going forward in 2017 and beyond, we're expecting to see increased staff in the Department of Buildings, and they'll likely have more auditors whose sole job it is to go out and re-audit buildings to make sure that they were done right. And we see that the rules are moving in a direction that weeds out engineers who are not truly qualified to do this work. And by that I mean people who just don't know what they're doing, or they might not have the tools to do all the retro commissioning testing properly, or they don't keep up with the rules and codes of Local Law 87 and the Energy Conservation Code. Also professionals who just don't continue to improve on their reports and retro commissioning testing protocols. The city really wants companies working on these kind of projects that provide ongoing education for their engineers so they're constantly getting better at this. Again, this is just from our perspective and experience from being out in the field. So make sure to reach out to the city if you're looking for any specific figures on the percentage of submissions they review every year, what changes are coming, or which companies' reports were rejected. All right? Alan, I hope that answers your question. And just write in the chat box if not, and we can reconnect offline to go over it some more. So what other questions do you have for me?
The next one comes from Jessica. She's asking if you can elaborate more on how should she determine the ideal start date based on how much savings potential a building has.
Sure thing. Let me go back to the slide that shows the sample of that portfolio efficiency assessment. One second. Okay, here it is. What we're looking at here is a sample of some information we include in our portfolio efficiency assessments. And this is a free financial report we do as a part of our partnership program. It allows us to see how much savings potential each building has and how much they can save realistically with a good return on investment. Then we can use this information to decide if some properties should have their energy audits conducted sooner, or maybe if there's some specific issues where it makes sense to wait until the same year it's due. In the sample scorecard you see over here to the left, the building has a potential to save up to 63% savings, which translates to about $286,000 a year in savings. However, that does not mean that it would be practical to reach that level of savings. Due to the law of diminishing returns, there's a point at which the next level of profits gained is less than the amount invested. And that means the more efficient a building is, the less low-hanging fruit they have, so the more expensive it's going to be to capture each extra dollar of savings. That's why we rarely recommend making your building the most efficient. Instead, what we want to do is find that sweet spot, the point at which it stops becoming cost efficient to make more improvements with the good return on investment. And we've coined this as the efficiency target. Let me show you what I mean over here to the right of the page. You'll see on the graph that as the building starts to become more efficient, the slope of the line here starts to get a little bit steeper, which means that it takes more money for each extra percentage increase in efficiency. So instead of looking at this building and thinking, hey, we can save $286,000, instead we want to look at it as having the potential to save realistically around $135,000 to $180,000 with a reasonable return on investment. And this is its efficiency target. And we do this because it's really important to be realistic when making investment decisions. You don't want to decide to start an energy audit 3 or 5 years in advance of its deadline based on the maximum amount that can be saved at all, because that's irrelevant, really. You want to compare and prioritize properties with the greatest ability to save money with a reasonable return on investment. And that's what this efficiency target will tell you. So once we conduct this assessment for all of your properties, you'll be able to more effectively prioritize your local Law 87 projects to position yourself to have a better opportunity to maximize your returns on investment. Without this information, most building owners just let the local Law 87 due dates dictate when they should start each project, and not really knowing how much money they could be wasting in the meantime. All right, let's go back.
Thanks, Anthony. That was a lot of good information. Jessica, let us know in the chat box if you have any other questions about that, okay? I have another question here from Steve. He's asking if you can tell us more about the partnership program and how it's different from what they're already doing.
Well, at this point, I can't say for certain how it's different from what you're already doing without knowing more about your existing compliance process. But what I can tell you is that we've been told that it's much more comprehensive and turnkey than what most companies are doing today. I don't want to make this into a pitch about our program, so I won't go into all the details here. But what I can do is just highlight some of the aspects that you should make sure you have with any partnership program you're considering for Local Law 87. All right? Okay, let me go back to the table I had shown you earlier. Okay, so given the fact that the city is becoming a lot more strict and is scrutinizing the report submissions much more now, one of the things you should make sure your partner company is giving you is a penalty protection guarantee. And this should say that they're going to pay for any of the fines the city imposes if they don't do their job right or if they don't do it on time, especially if there's revisions they have to do and they don't do it within that 10-day window the city gives us. And also that they're not going to charge you anything extra if your report does get reviewed by the city, which some companies will. Other things you should ask for are things such as early compliance discounts, price protection guarantees, and maybe special discounts if you enter into an exclusive partnership with them. I know for us that we give a flat 15% partnership discount off all our standard rates. And this is in addition to any of those early compliance discounts we give. And we also guarantee not to increase our rates for at least the next 3 years. And this is going to start to become much more important as we are expecting prices to increase every year from this point, since the city is starting to weed out a lot of those engineering companies. Whether they charge you for it or give it away for free like us, I want to make sure that you partner with a company who will take the time up front to sit down with you and put together a comprehensive 10-year compliance plan for all of your properties. And part of the process for us is conducting a portfolio efficiency assessment in order to determine that ideal start date for each project based on the projected savings potential of building and also any other issues or opportunities that may make a property move up or down in priority. I know that this is a proprietary tool that we developed in-house, but other companies might have something similar that they use as well. So just make sure to ask about this for any partnerships that you are considering. That's all I'll mention about our partnership program for now, since it's not the objective for today. But Steve, if you want more info about this, then let's set up another time to talk, and we can go over all the details later on, okay?
If anyone else is interested in that as well, please mention it in the chat box and I'll help with scheduling a time. Now, Anthony, we have time for just one more question, and this one is from Dennis. He said he's a developer and they have a building that's due next year, but it was built in 2008. He wants to know if he has to comply with this law or if he can get it.
That's a great question because a lot of building owners aren't sure about this. Officially, we have to recommend asking the Department of Buildings to get a definitive answer. But in our experience, it's possible, but not all the time. Technically, it's called a deferral for 10 years, not an exemption from the law altogether. But if your building was constructed or underwent a major rehab within the last 10 years, then you could get a deferral only if your building is in compliance with the current energy conservation code. So my guess would be that if your building was built in 2008, then it's unlikely that you would meet today's energy code requirements unless you went well above the standards at the time. If not, then conducting the energy audit and retrocommissioning study would likely be the less expensive route than bringing your building up to code. But if you think that your building might already meet those minimum code requirements, then all you would need is a registered architect to sign off that your building is in compliance, and then you can get a deferral for next year's local law 87 due date. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help guide you in the right direction. All right? So do we have any more questions?
We do have a few more questions still, but like I mentioned earlier, we are out of time right now and we are going to send email responses to everyone who didn't get their questions answered live.
Okay, no problem. We'll make sure to do that.
Just a quick reminder to everyone before we leave. All the attendees today of this webinar will receive free customized 10-year compliance plan from Vert Energy Group. And to sign up, go to vertenergygroup.com/compliance plan. And for more information about our partnership program, if you need a proposal for your upcoming Local Law 87 projects, you can also contact us with information on the screen. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.